I was about to read to you the statement, but let's go now to CNN's Boris Sanchez, who is joining us from near the president's resort there in Florida, where he is golfing today. So what more, if anything, is being said from the White House? Boris.
Hey there, Fred. Yeah, this started off as a relatively quiet, uneventful vacation for the president. And after the publishing of this explosive New York Times article, the White House is now having to spend their first full day here at Mar-a-Lago refuting some of the claims made by the New York Times and some of the explosive comments that were attributed to the president through the New York Times' various sources. Again, the White House denying that the president made those comments very strongly, providing to CNN the same statement that they provided to the New York Times. Sarah Sanders writing, quote, General Kelly, General McMaster, Secretary Tillerson, Secretary Nielsen, and all other senior staff actually in the meeting deny these outrageous claims. And it's both sad and telling that the New York Times would print the lies of their anonymous sources anyway. Clearly, the White House not wanting the focus to be on this reporting by the New York Times at this point. You'll recall that earlier this week, just yesterday, the president signed into legislation this major tax reform bill, something that he admitted that he would have preferred to have a large signing ceremony, a public signing ceremony for, but he opted to do it quickly before Christmas as a symbolic gift to the American people. We also learned yesterday, sources telling CNN, that the president wanted to have an end-of-year news conference, but that he was ultimately talked out of it by advisors who feared that the president might be besieged by questions about the Russia investigation and other distractions. This certainly classifies as another distraction for this White House to deal with at a point where they were feeling victorious about the tax reform bill. So we will see just what kind of an expanded response we might get from the White House following this. But as of right now, what we have is the statement from Sarah Sanders refuting all of the New York Times reporting, Fred.
All right. Boris Sanchez, thank you so much there in Florida. All right. A warning from Russia to the U.S. Why the Kremlin is concerned about new U.S. sanctions pertaining to Ukraine. Welcome back. A just-released New York Times article reports on explosive details of a June Oval Office meeting about President Trump's aggressive immigration agenda. In the article, the president is accused of making several inflammatory statements about immigrants. The Times article, citing 6 officials who attended or were briefed on the meeting, details the president was visibly upset about immigrants flooding into the United States despite his campaign promise to fortify the nation's borders. Venting to his national security team, the president reportedly began reading from a document given to him by domestic policy advisor Stephen Miller that listed how many immigrants received U.S. visas in 2017. And according to one of the officials who attended the meeting, according to this New York Times reporting, the document read that and I'm quoting now from how it's written out of the New York Times, Haiti had sent 15,000 people. And the president is being quoted here as saying, they all have AIDS, he grumbled, according to one person who attended the meeting. And then in this meeting, apparently, it was also mentioned how many had come from Nigeria. And I'm quoting now how it's written from the New York Times. 40,000 had come from Nigeria, Mr. Trump added. Once they had seen the United States, they would never, quote, go back to their huts in Africa, recalled the 2 officials who asked for anonymity. Now, I want to bring in one of the reporters, Michael Shear, of the New York Times, who helped break this story. Michael, good to see you. All right, so this meeting, now already Sarah Huckabee Sanders, the spokesperson, you had reached out to, and according to the article, Sanders is saying this didn't happen. So how did this come about? Do you have sources who either heard of, were in attendance of this meeting, who are giving you these quotes of how the president reacted to these things?
Right. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. My colleague Julie Davis and I both cover the White House, and we spent the last several months actually working on a very long piece about the president's immigration policy throughout the entire year. So we tried to trace from the beginning of the year, which started with the travel ban, all the way through a lot of the different pieces of immigration policy that the president has tried to implement, a lot of which have been aimed at securing the borders, making sure that people don't come into the United States. As part of that reporting, we talked to several people who described this meeting, which in which the president came into the Oval Office, had a lot of his national security team there, and was essentially complaining. This is about halfway through his year in June, complaining that the steps that they had taken so far hadn't done enough to secure the borders, to keep people out, that people were still flooding in his words, as too many people coming in, and that they posed potentially a threat and other problems. And it was in the course of the reporting for that meeting that we talked to people who described how the meeting went and what the president said, and that, as you described, that he read from a list of countries and how many people were had come into the United States from those countries. And that's when he made sort of derogatory comments, first about the Haitians, and then about the Nigerians and others. And so, we're confident. We stand by our sourcing. We're confident that story is true. The White House did push back very aggressively late last night and early this morning, sending us a note that said that several of the cabinet secretaries who were in the meeting at the time say that it didn't happen. Not that the meeting didn't happen, but that the comments, the inflammatory comments weren't said. But we stand by our reporting, and I think, would encourage people to look at the entire story, because there are many, many different aspects to this story. It's a long piece, and it talks not just about this meeting, which I think is emblematic of his approach on immigration, but also kind of about the rest of the year and all the different things that the administration did. And you also write in your reporting that there's real consternation, that apparently it elicited quite the emotional response from John Kelly, who is now Chief of Staff. At the time, it was Secretary of State, also Tillerson, Rex Tillerson, who was in the meeting, or at least listening to the comments from your reported comments from the president, as well as this documentation. But that seems to really underscore some real fissures, too, in how they were handling what you are reporting to have happened in that meeting. Right. I mean, this was essentially the president and most of the national security apparatus that deals with this issue, that deals with immigration and border control. And there was, it was described to us as very heated and a lot of back and forth, a lot of crosstalk. And at one point, Mr. Kelly, General Kelly, who's now the Chief of Staff, was then the Homeland Security Secretary, and Stephen Miller, the Domestic Policy Advisor, really did sort of gang up on Secretary Tillerson, whose State Department, of course, manages the sort of entry into the country. That's the Consular Affairs Division of the State Department. And so there was a lot of tension. At one point, Secretary Kelly said, sort of looked around the room, realized there were other aides in the room, and said, we should clear the room here if we're going to continue this conversation. And at that point, many of the more junior folks left, and it was just the cabinet secretaries who remained to continue the conversation with the president. So this almost indicates, too, in reading your article, that, the real differences of approach were apparent even then, particularly with Secretary of State Rex Tillerson kind of being on the outside of how he was digesting this kind of information. It almost sounds from this article that if taking offense is too strong of a language, that he seemed uncomfortable with this kind of response coming from the president, as you report it. Well, look, this ultimately wasn't a piece that was designed to look at the question of the fissures inside the administration. There's been a lot of other reporting, my newspaper and elsewhere, about the differences between Secretary Tillerson and others on the president's staff and the president himself. So this wasn't the idea of this article wasn't to sort of get at that, but it's certainly true that what was true about that meeting was that there was a lot of frustration, a lot of raw emotion, or a lot of raw feeling. And what we document in the rest of the story is that it took a while for the president's staff to kind of figure out how to maneuver the levers of power in government to get the things done that he wanted to get done on immigration. And so what didn't work as well at the beginning of the administration, we all remember the chaos of that first travel ban. When you sort of get to the end of the year, he's reduced limits on refugee entry into the country. He's ratcheted up enforcement and deportations inside the country. And so you get this sense that regardless of what the disagreements and divisions were among some of the key players, by the end of the year, the administration really has done a more effective job at implementing this sort of restrictionist agenda, this sort of keep people out agenda, which is what the president really wanted to do when he came into office. Yeah, and we've talked about Nigeria and
and Haiti, but also on the issue of Afghanistan. That was also something that was discussed, and you're reporting it here. You know, more than 2,500 were from Afghanistan, a terrorist haven. The president complained. That's how you have it written in your article. But give me some detail on how the 2,500 number from Afghanistan was part of that documentation that was either being read to in some part and also the president reading, and what his response meant.
Well, so one of the things that was said back to the president during that meeting, according to our sources, was from Mr. Kelly and also Mr. Tillerson, was, look, these numbers that you're seeing on the paper, Mr. President, are largely, they're not indicative of threats. They're an overall number of people coming into the United States from those countries. So that could include, like in Afghanistan, it could certainly include, people who had worked with the American military as translators, or people who had relatives.
So arrangements.
In the United States. And so they were trying to say to him, look, don't take these numbers and think, wow, all of these people are threats. But it indicates the level of frustration on the president's part that even just a number on a page triggers in him a sense of like, hey, we're not doing enough to keep the country safe. And they would argue that that's what the president, what his motivation here is to try to secure the country against threats. We've seen, some of the attacks that happened in the last couple of months, the one in New York City and what have you. So their argument would be, look, this is what angers the president, is that, we're not doing enough to secure our borders. And that what this meeting shows is that sometimes comes out in very raw way.
And this was the White House spokesperson, Sarah Huckabee Sanders' response to your reporting, saying, quote, General Kelly, General McMaster, Secretary Tillerson, Secretary Nielsen, and all other senior staff actually in this meeting deny these outrageous claims. It's both sad and telling. The New York Times would print the lies of their anonymous sources anyway. And also in your reporting, you mentioned that there were people outside of the room, but they could hear the sentiments of the president, and that he seemed enraged.
Well, so he was clearly angry, according to the people that we talked to, both who had been in the meeting, but also who had been briefed about it. Just to clarify, the folks, when we referenced folks that had been moved out of the meeting and were outside, the meeting at one point, as I mentioned, did get cleared out of some of the other staff members. We're not suggesting that they could hear through the closed door the specifics of the conversation, but once they were outside and the door closed, they could clearly hear that the conversation remained heated and was ongoing.
Okay, Michael Shear, it's a fascinating read. Thanks so much for joining us with the New York Times. Appreciate it.
Sure. Thank you very much.
And we'll be right back.
For Christy Paul.
And I'm Victor Blackwell. Good morning to you.
Now, the president is starting his morning at his golf course. He's celebrating after Christmas came early in the form of his first major legislative win, tax reform.
But this end-of-the-year high could be overshadowed by new developments in the looming Russia investigation. The president wanted to celebrate the win with this traditional year-end news conference, but his aides told him not to. Now, the House Intelligence Committee began questioning Trump's longtime assistant over the meeting between Donald Trump Jr. and the Russians back in June of 2016.
All of this may be making Republicans nervous as they head into the 2018 midterm elections. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell is reportedly concerned about losing both the House and the Senate to Democrats.
Our new this morning, Senator John McCain released a statement supporting the president's decision to provide Ukraine with anti-tank weapons. Here's the statement. President Trump's reported decision to provide Javelin anti-tank munitions to Ukraine marks another significant step in the right direction and sends a strong signal that the United States will stand by its allies and partners as they fight to defend their sovereignty and territorial integrity. Well, this decision is years overdue, he says.
The president's move comes amid escalating clashes between Ukrainian soldiers and the Russian-backed separatists. Joining us now, CNN legal global affairs correspondent Elise Labott. Elise, Trump also just allowed Ukraine to buy weapons from U.S. companies.
That's right, Renee. And look, what they say is that these anti-tank munitions are considered lethal weapons. But what the U.S. says, and this is what the State Department said in a statement last night, is, these weapons are considered defensive in nature because they're not going after someone. The Ukrainians are defending their territory, and that's why, these anti-tank missiles can puncture the kind of armored vehicles that the Russians use. Now, we had some new reaction from the Russians this morning. Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Rubikov, in a statement, said that this action is going to create new bloodshed. Let me read a little bit to this statement. The United States, in a certain sense, he said, had crossed the line, announcing the intention to transfer weapons of direct damaging action to Ukraine. American weapons can lead to new victims in our neighboring country, to which we cannot remain indifferent. And so, a lot of people are afraid that this could be a pretext for Russia to launch new attacks, new strikes into Ukraine to try and further its grip on the country, Renee.
Elise, I think it's important also for people to remember how we got here. I mean, U.S. Officials have been standing in solidarity with Ukraine, but there has, for years since the annexation of Crimea, been this question of to what degree do you allow the Ukrainians to defend themselves with this lethal and non-lethal weaponry. And now this is a major step. I think that the punctuation from Senator McCain points that out.
Right. And I mean, this is the first time we're looking at this kind of lethal weaponry. Again, the U.S. calling it defensive in nature against Russian aggression. President Obama did allow what President Trump allowed earlier this week, is for the Ukrainians to buy American-made light arms. You see that shoulder-fired missile right there. Some of those are considered light arms. Sometimes those are considered, and like small ones could be considered anti-tank missiles. But look, the U.S. has had a bit of a dilemma over the years, because clearly there is Russian aggression in Ukraine, but they've also been looking for the Ukrainians to make certain reforms of their own. The Ukrainians are not completely without some concerns about human rights violations and such, and there's been a concern about further escalating the situation. But apparently, and officials have said, this has really weighed on President Trump. And I have to say, for all of the criticism of President Trump, that he was going to bow to the Russians, that he was going to recognize Crimea as Russian territory, that he was going to lift those sanctions. That never happened. This is, in fact, a stepping up of, a tougher policy towards Russia, it seems, if you look at the actual actions that are taking place.
All right, Elise Labott with us this morning. Elise, thank you so much for breaking that down for us. The FBI says a terror attack has been averted in San Francisco. A former U.S. Marine is accused of...
I'm Michael Smerconish in Philadelphia. We welcome our viewers in the United States and around the world. Merry Christmas, everybody. We know what the president wants for Christmas: credit from all the media for all of his achievements. He tweeted, "Sadly, the fake mainstream media will never talk about our accomplishments in their end-of-year reviews. We're compiling a long and beautiful list." Well, Mr. President, stick around. I'm about to talk about your impact. Plus, with 750 million packages delivered by UPS this holiday season, a growing number are being stolen by so-called porch pirates. I'm about to talk to a man who has figured out how to fight back with a bang. Plus, did you ever talk about something on your phone and suddenly start seeing ads for it? Is it a coincidence? Or are our smartphones spying on us? And a look back at some memorable moments on both sides from 2017, including everybody's favorite blooper by yours truly. George Papadopoulos. I know, I'm a dope. But first, we're almost 1 year into the Trump administration, and the end of any year is a time for assessing, especially this one. Mike Allen had an interesting observation this week in his Axios newsletter. He pointed out how little President Trump and perceptions of him have changed in the last year. Think about it. Roughly the same number of people support him today as did at the beginning of his administration. The Russian probe has remained constant. The elected Republicans remain skeptical of his leadership, but largely compliant. The elected Democrats, they still don't like him. The war with the media has never subsided, and neither have his Twitter fingers. All true. But there's a temptation in those observations to conclude that his administration, the passage of the tax bill notwithstanding, is static, gridlocked, that nothing's getting done in a polarized climate. That would be a mistake. In fact, if the pace of change continues for the duration of Trump's presidency, however long that might be, I think he could become the most consequential president in the modern era. Consequential meaning most important and significant, having the biggest overall impact. As with the criteria that Time magazine uses when determining its Person of the Year, this is not necessarily a good thing. Think about it. A Supreme Court position that was by rights a Democratic pick instead went to Trump. And his influence on shaping the federal judiciary is far greater than just Neil Gorsuch on the nation's highest court. He broke a Senate record this year by confirming a dozen new U.S. Circuit Court judges, the most during a president's first year in office in more than a century. At the rate that he's going, by next year, more than 12% of federal cases heard will be by Trump-appointed judges. Those picks will be his longest-lasting legacy. The tax bill that he's just signed is the first major overhaul of policy since the Reagan era. Whatever the effect, that won't be undone anytime soon. And by ending the individual mandate, President Trump has felled a major domino that will upset the economic viability of the Affordable Care Act. After all, how can you provide coverage for those with pre-existing conditions if you don't have everybody in the insurance pool? Trump has made cutting federal regulations a priority. He's revoked 67. He's delayed or derailed more than 1,500 others. He's pulled out of the Paris Climate Accord, okayed the Keystone Pipeline, recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, and refused to recertify the Iranian nuclear deal. On his watch, the Iraq prime minister just declared victory over ISIS. The New York Times' Ross Douthat called it a war Trump won. In immigration enforcement, ICE has arrested more than 100,000 people who entered the U.S. illegally, 70% of whom were already convicted criminals. His State Department has undergone massive restructuring and shrinking, again, for better or for worse. And don't forget about the influence that ideologically driven members of his cabinet are having out of the spotlight. Betsy DeVos at Education, Scott Pruitt at the EPA, Ben Carson at HUD, Rick Perry at Energy, Jeff Sessions at Justice. No, Time magazine got it wrong when not naming the president its Person of the Year in 2017. By their own definition, the person who most affected the news and our lives for good or ill and embodied what was important about the year was absolutely Donald J. Trump. Joining me now to discuss Douglas Brinkley, he's a presidential historian and history professor at Rice University, and Larry Sabato, the director of the Center for Politics at the University of Virginia. Larry, he's getting lots done, but without popular support. Can that continue?
I doubt it. Look how difficult it was to get that tax bill passed, and he never could get Obamacare repealed. I know about the individual mandate being abolished, but that's not the same thing as abolishing Obamacare. And this was with a new presidency, usually coming with some kind of honeymoon, Republican majorities in both houses. I grant you, thin majority in the Senate, but still, most new presidents with a majority in both houses get a great deal done. I would say that while certainly Trump has accomplished some things, and I agree with you on the judiciary, he could have accomplished a great deal more if he were a different kind of president. I don't know about being the most consequential, but I'll tell you this, he's the most different president in the modern era.
I think everybody could agree on that, including the president. Douglas Brinkley, there's a lot to be said for that which takes place through inaction. Differentiate between action and inaction and what it means for this presidency.
Well, just take a look at what you said, pulling out of the Paris Accord. Yes, he did that. What does that mean in the end? And it means that Donald Trump's turned his back completely on climate change. What history may show is the overridingly important issue of our time. I mean, we've having unusual wildfires, hurricanes, glaciers melting. The planet is really alarmed right now, and Donald Trump decides, it doesn't exist. I don't want to believe and listen to the scientists. So by that very inaction this year, we're losing momentum. We're not educating the society on what to do to make some changes with climate change. I just picked that one. You could go all over and see, he's gutting the Environmental Protection Agency by 33%. Okay, you could save some money right now, and you're also make a little money, mining and leasing the public lands. What does that mean long term? What does it mean 100 years from now when we start just willy-nilly, desecrating public lands for gouging quick gain profits? Conservation is always about our children's children. So there's a lot that went on this year that I don't think is going to shine well in history. It'll be remembered for Charlottesville, Pocahontas, NFL issues that divide the nation on race and identity.
You know what occurs to me, Larry Sabato, is that everything that Douglas Brinkley, the historian, says might be true, and yet it will be seen differently in different ends of the country. For example, the laundry list that he just rattled off of the negatives will be embraced by the 46% who put him in office.
Well, you're probably right about that, at least most of the 46%. Remember, he has dropped somewhat. He's in the mid-30s. Maybe you could exaggerate it up to 40 based on the fact that the polls often underestimate his support. But he has lost support. Why is that? Because, as Doug was suggesting, he is terribly divisive. Instead of trying to bring people together, and this is not an era when you can bring people together, but he could have won a few percent more. He could have won over some people who were kind of in the middle about him to begin with. Instead, because of what he has done and because of the way he does it, Michael, he has divided people, I think, more than at any time since perhaps the last year of Richard Nixon's presidency. That is not a good thing. It is not a good thing that we are now truly the divided states of America. Red states over here, blue states over there, and oddly enough, those purple competitive states, they're also choosing up sides.
Gentlemen, is it possible to put this in some historical perspective? I want to show you what the president said yesterday, and then, Douglas, I'll ask you to respond first. Roll the tape.
Legislative approvals, for which I'm given no credit in the mainstream media. Harry Truman had more legislative approvals than any other president. We beat him on legislative approvals, for which I get no credit.
Historian Douglas Brinkley, he references Harry Truman. Who comes to your mind, if anyone?
Well, look, just Harry Truman created the CIA, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the National Security Council, the Pentagon, the Department of Air Force, the Secretary of Defense ship. I could go on and on. What did Donald Trump create this year? What is he going to be remembered for? I mean, John F. Kennedy, in his first year in office, Michael, did some bold things. He said, we're going to put a man to the moon by the end of the decade, and he started getting money put into states like places like Huntsville, Alabama, and Houston, Texas, infrastructure money on technology that worked with the space program. Kennedy created his first year the Peace Corps, Alliance for Progress. What's Trump known for? All over the world, he's seen as a bully. That's the net takeaway at the end of the year, and perhaps a bigot. And so it's very hard to see why history is going to be shining a great flashlight on a president with a 35% approval rating, the lowest since polls have been taken, whose big home run was a tax bill. That doesn't really excite people. It is a success at the end of the year, and he did get Gorsuch in, but it's been a very rocky first year.
Dr. Sabato, I think what he's achieved is that which he said he was going to do, which was largely, for better or worse, to reverse Obama-era policies.
Well, you're correct on that too, Michael. Let's talk about what that means, though. When you base your presidency around your base, your party base, and you are unable or incapable of bringing some people from the other party in the long run, that means the same thing is going to happen to Donald Trump. What karma that's happening to Barack Obama? Obama's presidency is being deconstructed piece by piece. Trump and his appointees are pulling out by the roots Obamacare's policies and regulations and programs. Look, at some point, I don't know when, is it 2020, is it 2024, can't tell you, but at some point you will have a Democratic president, a Democratic Senate, a Democratic House again. And I can almost guarantee you that the Democratic base will insist that the Democratic president and Congress do the very same thing to whatever is left of Trump's legacy.
Can I just say as a final word to both Douglas Brinkley and Larry Sabato, I worry most about a crisis. Knock on wood, we've really not had one in the first year of his watch, and I worry about what happens in a very polarized setting in one of those moments when in another time we would most certainly rally around the flag. Happy holidays to both of you. I really appreciate your expertise. Perfect guests for today. Thank you, sir.
Thank you,
Michael.
What are your thoughts? Tweet me at Smerconish. Go to my Facebook page. I will read some responses throughout the course of the program. What do we got, Catherine? Can you give the Trump bashing a break? Why not point out the positive facts versus negative opinions? Smerconish. Tricia, are you blanking me? Like, that was the most, I wrote every word of it myself. That was the most even presentation of what this year has been that you will find anywhere. That's not an MSNBC view. That's not a Fox view. That is a straight down the middle assessment of, for better or worse, here is what has just transpired. And it gets frustrating for me for people who hear what they want to hear what they think they hear, and just don't listen clearly. One more if we've got time for it. Your pan of Trump was discussed. See what I mean? This shows your true preferences. I mean, Rajiv, can you please get together with the last tweeter and maybe the two of you can work it out? It's remarkable how people hear the same thing and just take away from it different conclusions. Up next, it's peak package delivery season, which means porch pirates are in full thievery mode. But one man hopes to thwart them in an explosive new style. Is it wrong that I laugh every time I
exercise rooms and swimming pools?
The Hispanic Caucus and DACA recipients, activists as well, are reeling after Democrats postponed action on the DACA program for the third time this year. There was no fix in the September short-term spending bill, no fix in the 2-week spending bill that passed on December 8th, no fix on the spending bill on Thursday before the government ran out of funding. Democratic leaders insist they have a strategy to pass a DACA fix in January. However, will they deliver on the promises, though, and when? Here with me to discuss, CNN political commentator Maria Cardona and chairman of the National Bar Association, PAC, and former D.C. Democratic Party chairman A. Scott Bolden. Good morning to both of you.
Good morning,
Victor.
So let's start here, Maria, with what we heard from Minority Leader in the House, Nancy Pelosi, earlier this year in November.
I'll have to see what the spending bill is, but I fully intend that we will not leave here without the DREAM Act passing, with a DACA fix. And I've made that very clear.
We will not leave. Well, they left and it didn't happen. Explain how this is not a promise broken here.
Well, first of all, let's remember that Democrats do not control Congress. They don't control the House. They don't control the Senate. Exactly. They have very limited leverage.
But she knew that when she said it.
Sure, but what she was doing was certainly pushing not just Democrats, but Republicans as well. Let's remember there are many Republicans who have also made the promise to fix DACA, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, for almost 1 million kids who came here through no fault of their own, who now, thanks to President Trump, who, took that protection away from them, are now in limbo. And so what she was voicing, which is still the case today, is that protecting these dreamers, as we call them, is a huge priority for Democrats, is a huge priority for American voters. And the hope was that Republicans would also make sure that this was a priority for them. We know that many of them support this. There is a bipartisan bill in Congress right now that if Republicans had the political will to put it on the floor right now, it would pass overwhelmingly with bipartisan support.
There's also Jeff Flake who said that in voting for the tax cut that he got some confirmation that there would be a DACA fix as well. So there is bipartisanship in the Senate as well. Let me get this guy because I don't have a whole lot of time here. Sure. But this obviously is something that has bipartisan support, as Maria pointed out and we pointed out in the Senate. But if if Republicans say yes, there will be a DACA fix, there will be protection for these roughly 800,000 undocumented peoples in this country who came here as children, no fault of their own, but we want money to start building this wall. Is that a fair exchange?
It's not a fair exchange, quite frankly.
But should Democrats take it?
Well, if the Democrats what? I'm sorry.
Should Democrats take that deal?
Of course not. They ought not take that deal because this has bipartisan support if they can get it to the floor. And remember, this isn't over. January 19th is when that spending bill is up, and they'll have to do another take. And Schumer has given a commitment to 17 or 18 Hispanic members of the House, as well as some others in the Senate, that they're going to lay the law down, or they're going to lay down the law on this. But this is about political capital. And the Democrats are committed to spending political capital on this. There's some Republicans as well. And remember, the backdrop of all of this is 2018, and that's as important for the Republicans as it is for the Democrats on this DACA issue.
All right, Scott, let me stay with you. And Doug Jones, Senator-elect from Alabama, is heading to the Senate in January, and there was an open letter signed by 20 organizations that worked to get out the vote for Doug Jones in that special election just a couple of weeks ago. I want to read a line from it. The ticker tape for Jones' victory has barely been swept from the floor, and we are already seeing him pandering to the right and stepping away from the interest of the people who elected him. Just a couple of days ago, he had to walk back when he told Jake Tapper that it's time to move on from the sexual harassment allegations against the president, and some in the Senate who have said that the president should resign. Are you concerned about the degree to which Doug Jones will fulfill those promises he made to Democrats to win this race, considering how conservative, how ruby red of a state Alabama is and what you're seeing from him already?
I'm not worried yet, and I hope I won't get worried once he gets in. This is hardcore politics, and Doug Jones' win was a great win for the Democrats, certainly better than Roy Moore being there. But here's the deal. He's in a very, very difficult situation because he's coming from a red state. African Americans and others voted to support him. He owes a lot of people, and he owes a lot of people who aren't ruby red, if you will. So he's going to have to balance that act, support those who supported him. It's going to be tough, but we have to keep politicians like Jones accountable, and we have to press them and make them vote the way we want them to vote to support what's in our best interest, and usually what's in the best interest of America. We'll see.
Maria, he's up again in 2020, just filling out the re-election from Jeff Sessions back in 2014, so he's going to be back on the ballot again. Your degree of concern, considering what we've seen in just the short couple of weeks since the election?
Well, I would echo what Scott said. He is completely in a very difficult position, and he does have a tightrope act he has to perform here in the next 2 years. But I am going to give him confidence and the benefit of the doubt, because he is from Alabama. He is from the communities that supported him. He understands the issues that are important to the voters of Alabama, and he ran a fantastic campaign. And I believe that the relationships that he has actually nurtured for decades on the ground are relationships that he will continue to respect, and that he will mirror the issues that are important to most Alabama voters. And like Scott said, what's important to most Alabama voters, the economy, health care. I do believe these issues of sexual allegations will be front and center as well. And Scott mentioned, or I'm sorry, Doug Jones mentioned that this was going to be something that, moving forward, he agreed that these women need to be heard. So all of these issues, I think, are issues that will help him going into his re-election campaign, which will be tough but doable.
All right, Maria Cardona, Scott Bolden, thank you both.
Thank you so much.
Well, up next, proof that one person truly can help turn a child's life around. See how a high school football coach opened up his heart and his home to one of his players. You don't want to miss this remarkable story. Well, it's been nearly 1 year since President Trump took office, and by any measure, it's been a whirlwind of events on everything from the appointment of Justice Neil Gorsuch to passing tax reform.
CNN's Dana Bash takes a look back at some of his most memorable moments of 2017.
Let's be honest, the first year of the Trump presidency feels more like a decade because of the relentless stream of news. Here's a look at some of the key moments of President Trump's first year in office. For candidate Trump, large campaign crowds were the norm. But at his inauguration, this was a sore subject. The new president grew angry watching reports his inaugural crowd size was smaller than President Obama's. One of his first presidential acts was to order his press secretary to do this.
This was the largest audience to ever witness an inauguration, period.
That's something the president himself amplified while standing in front of a CIA memorial to fallen heroes.
We had a massive field of people. You saw them, packed. I looked out. The field it looked like 1.5 million people.
But the numbers didn't lie, and the episode set an early Trump administration tone. Government regulation. It sure doesn't sound exciting, so it's no surprise the Trump administration effort on this was not splashy 2017 news.
1, 2, 3.
But the president withdrew hundreds of regulations, a dull term with a real-world impact, from the safety of the products you use to the air you breathe.
We have reduced unnecessary regulations to a point that this country hasn't seen in years.
It was a promise kept to Republicans who argue excess regulation hurts business and economic growth.
Raise your right hand.
The most lasting Trump 2017 accomplishment is arguably the nomination and confirmation of Neil Gorsuch to the Supreme Court.
I will do all my powers permit to be a faithful servant of the Constitution and laws of this great nation.
The seat was open for a year since the death of Justice Antonin Scalia and Senate Republicans' refusal to consider President Obama's pick, Judge Merrick Garland.
You will go down as one of the truly great justices in the history of the United States Supreme Court.
Judges can disagree without being disagreeable.
Getting Gorsuch was noteworthy not just for the Trump legacy, but the process.
It is an extraordinary resume.
From announcement to confirmation, this success was the most conventional Trump undertaking of the year. After months of back and forth between Donald Trump and North Korea's dictator, words like Rocket Man and Fire and Fury, the president took his insults to the world stage, his first speech at the United Nations.
If it is forced to defend itself or its allies, we will have no choice but to totally destroy North Korea.
The rhetorical crossfire continued on Twitter and through regime statements.
Rocket Man is on a suicide mission for himself.
By year's end, the escalation reached new heights. North Korea tested its most powerful missile yet, with the capacity to reach the U.S. mainland. No discussion about Donald Trump's first year in the White House would be complete without talking about his favorite little birdie. He sent more than 2,000 tweets in 2017 alone, from the mystery of Covfefe to a series of really consequential posts, like unprecedented attacks on his own party's leadership, and some head-scratching retweets. This anti-Muslim video sent by a Brit convicted of hate crimes caused a diplomatic rift with the British Prime Minister, plus his claim that President Obama wiretapped Trump Tower. Yet the one that may come back to haunt him the most, taunting fired FBI Director James Comey. Better hope there are no tapes of our conversations. The hands-down biggest 2017 Trump defeat, failure to repeal and replace Obamacare. John McCain's dramatic no vote sealed its fate, but Republicans were split on how to fulfill their Obamacare repeal promise, one that helped them win control of government. That loss made President Trump and Hill Republicans' quest for tax reform a political life-or-death mission. Must pass legislation.
The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, as amended, is passed.
And it worked.
People are going to be very, very happy. They're going to get tremendous tax cuts.
Whether most Americans, especially working-class Trump voters, will see that as a win, to be determined. And finally, the most important Trump moment of 2017, firing FBI Director James Comey. Sacking Comey while he was investigating potential 2016 Trump-Russia collusion caused a political earthquake with aftershocks still rattling the president.
Let's see what happens.
Not the least of which, Comey's revelation that he kept detailed memos documenting meetings with the president, which Comey asked a friend to leak to the press.
I asked a friend of mine to share the content of the memo with a reporter. I asked him to because I thought that might prompt the appointment of a special counsel.
That's exactly what happened. And Special Prosecutor Robert Mueller's Russia investigation was a cloud over the first year of the Trump presidency. which so far produced indictments of 2 former Trump campaign officials and the guilty plea of former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn for lying to the FBI. What a year! What will 2018 bring? Buckle up.
No matter what size your label says, Men's Warehouse has you covered.
All right, so Victor, I know you still have some more shopping to do, so this next story is for you. If you're looking for that unique gift this holiday season, you may want to consider a very special bear.
Yes, he knows the best words. He's got like a world-class memory, and he has an American flag he carries around. Here's Jeannie Mose.
Prepare to be blown away by this Christmas gift just by the fact that it exists.
The wind whispered through the forest. I come when the trumpet sounds. Introducing the original Trumpy Bear.
Is this really a thing? Reads a typical comment.
Just find the secret zipper and pull out the flag blanket. Then
this looks like a bad SNL skit. Read another.
Everyone knows Trumpy Bear loves to go to the golf course.
When I ride with Trumpy Bear, he makes my golf game great again. Thank you, Trumpy Bear.
Is this crap for real? Read a third.
Simply style his trademark hair.
You betcha.
Order now for only 2 payments of $19.95.
I can personally vouch for Trumpy Bear. He exists. We have one. A company that specializes in seen-on-TV ads is doing the marketing for the woman who created Trumpy Bear. Nothing partisan, the VP says. We'd like everyone to buy it, meaning Trump lovers and haters.
Trumpy Bear is proudly made in America. I'm kidding, it's made in China.
The most fearless bear anywhere.
That's right, he will kick Winnie the Pooh's ass.
Instantly recognizable with its red tie and its combable hair. No wonder critics are making small hands jokes. I am disappointed with the size of its paws. One thing Trumpy Bear cannot do is tweet. No fingers. Hey, if President Teddy Roosevelt can inspire teddy bears, why can't President Trump inspire Trumpy Bears?
I'm proud to have Trumpy Bear ride by my side.
Its maker is planning some design changes in the new year, but it will still come with
the special certificate of authenticity.
So that you know who can't say,
why doesn't he show his birth certificate?
Jeannie Mose, CNN.
God bless Trumpy Bear.
New York.
Why doesn't he show his birth certificate?
Jeannie Mose, CNN.
God bless Trumpy Bear.
New York.